Good afternoon. Welcome to another exciting podcast presented to you by Albuquerque Fire Rescue. My name is Lieutenant John McGee. I'll be your host today, and we have a special guest. We have Special Programs Director for PSPG, or the Public Safety Psychology Group, and the Early Childhood Development Specialist, Jen Rogers.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've read you and your husband, Troy's position paper.
Okay.
Right? And the paper, the subject matter, and I'll just read the title. I know you wrote it, but I'll read it for the sake of the audience. COVID-19 and the long-term psychological effects on our children, right? And that's a mouthful.
It is.
And for me, I guess I realized that COVID-19 was affecting families. But we've been taught by the media that it really didn't affect children. And we were thinking in terms of infection.
Right.
But what I missed were the psychological effects, right? So here with the position paper, you start off and you say, let me briefly introduce myself. And right away I thought, well, who is she introducing herself to? So who was your target audience? Who did you write this position paper to?
We wrote it for anybody who really has a stake in children in our state, and we were hoping to get it out to a lot of folks. So as you mentioned, my husband, Troy, is not only a psychologist, he's also a coach. And so our hope was to get it out kind of multiple directions.
Like a high school coach?
Yeah, he's a high school wrestling coach.
Okay.
Yep. And so he's wanting the NMAA to kind of hear this. He's wanting...
now, for people not in the state, what is the NMAA?
Sorry, New Mexico Activities Association.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
and they govern...
all of the sports through middle and high school, all the school sports.
Okay.
And so we were wanting them to recognize kind of the official kind of struggles that kids are going through, and also anybody else who needed to have some sort of backing to what they're seeing in terms of teachers and those sorts of
things. So we were talking about the public education department, maybe.
Correct.
What about the governor's office?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we did send a copy to her.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Any feedback from either
We got
of
the
those?
official thank you.
Right on.
Yeah.
Good for you.
We got the official thank you letter. So.
Okay. So you talked about the effects on the children.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that this information came to your attention? And well, let's talk about what the problem is. How about that? Let's define
Sure.
what you see.
So what we're seeing, as you guys are seeing, when folks are kind of locked up, whether they're in quarantine, whether they've not had a job for a while, when we're not lucky enough to be first responders and get out every day,
Sure.
We're kind of stuck at home. And that makes us a little bit stir crazy. When you put that impact on children who don't have the benefit of really understanding all of the ins and outs and the whys, that's part one. And then part two is they're struggling socially and academically. And so we've got a whole group of kids right now who are already behind academically, and now we are putting them in front of a screen for however many hours a day and saying, please learn this way. And by the way, don't learn from any sort of social interaction. It's stunting them in multiple ways.
And you've seen, so you have a business, right?
Right.
The PSPG, the psychology group, you treat individuals, right?
We do. We treat first responders and their families. So we're seeing this both in the adults and then also the struggles that they're having with their kids. But we also have a middle school program where we teach in Bernalillo County 7th grade health. And so we decided last semester to not teach because I didn't want to do it virtually.
Gotcha.
And now knowing that we need to do it, you just see the kids and they're blank kind of looking back at you on the screen.
So you've interacted with these kids. Now, are you seeing this in terms of your treatment of these children? Mm-hmm. Depression, I'm guessing.
Yep.
And is that an increase from what you experienced
Sure.
prior to COVID?
So what we're seeing across the board, even in adults, is a 300% increase in mental health related issues.
300%?
300%.
From when?
from a year ago.
So right when COVID
so rightly
began.
pre-COVID, if you look at those numbers, you're going from folks who are, kind of going about their business to diving into quarantine, losing their job, whatever it may be, and 300% calls for mental health.
And how does this present clinically? Like mental health is broad. What are we talking about?
We're talking about people who are needing to be seen because they're feeling signs of depression. They're feeling anxiety, maybe when they do go out to the supermarket or places like that. And then on the kids' side, things like social isolation is really causing a lot of folks to struggle when they're basically shut in their room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then, I read in the paper, we're even talking about things like increased obesity, right? Because as a parent, maybe sometimes to, for lack of a better term, sedate the kids. It's going to be first snack time, then second snack time, and they're snacking all day. Have you seen this as well?
You see on both sides. You see the kids who are getting kind of overfed and maybe not the best food, right? Because it's hard. And then you have the kids who are not eating at all because mom and dad aren't home to provide the food. They're off at work or whatever they might be doing. And so
Now, these are kids who may have been relying on school food or lunch programs before to get most of their meals during the day.
Correct, because a lot of New Mexico schools are Title I schools, which is free and reduced lunch. But then on top of that, even more of our schools are getting free breakfasts. So you've got kids who 2 meals a day, now they're losing access to if they're not in school.
Wow. So, okay, and then you guys talk about the Blue Thunder Foundation, and that was interesting. Tell me a little bit about it.
So that is kind of our sister foundation. We started a nonprofit a few years ago, recognizing that kids need sports and that they're not always able to access them due to the fees associated with club sports. And so on top of that, we also found that first responders love to coach. They need outlets for their kind of own mental health.
Is that a good thing?
It's a great thing.
Oh, okay.
And so we combine the two. And so we've got programs where our kiddos are being coached by first responders who are volunteering their time.
Okay. And the foundation covers fees?
Covers all their fees. It's a low cost if you can't afford it. It's not a big deal.
Is that across the board, all sports?
Right. So we're hoping to expand more sports.
Interesting.
But right now, again, with COVID, it's really shut down. But our biggest one was wrestling. And so we had a 4-year-old all the way
I know
high
your
school.
husband. I think he told me he was quite the collegiate athlete, wrestler.
So I'll brag on him for a minute because he's not here. He was a 12-time Letterman in high school.
Oh, wow.
He was the state athlete.
In 4 years?
4 years.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. All 8 years. He was the state athlete of the year here in New Mexico.
Wow.
And then, so wrestling, baseball, and football. And he played baseball and football in college.
Wow. Guy could have went pro. Sounds like.
It paid for school.
Right on.
Yeah.
So you had some interesting points in your position paper, and I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here, right?
Okay.
Because there were some studies that came out. We talked about it's difficult because while you acknowledge school closures almost had to happen until we could catch up with vaccines and investigate what this is, there were some unintended consequences.
Right.
Some of the ones you named. And then some studies came out, and I'll quote one here, right? It says that in one study, they looked at 100,000 hospitalizations per week, and they were only seeing 36 to 44 new cases out of that 100,000 people.
Right.
That sounds pretty small, right? On one end, but on the other end, would I want my child to be one of those 36 to 44 children? So what's your position on that? Are we saying we shouldn't have closed the schools, or that we had to?
I think at some point we probably needed to, especially last spring when it first came out, I think we needed to do what we did, which was shut down the schools, go virtual, and try to figure things out. Once the data started coming in that was showing that kids were not the ones getting truly sick, whether they had healthy backgrounds or not. This, like the flu and like many other viruses, is something that affects older generations. And so I think there was a way that we probably could have gotten back to school faster looking at that information.
Is that kind of looking back, though? Is that a hindsight thing or?
A little bit. But if you start looking at some of the other states opened up a lot quicker when they were looking at that data and breaking it down that way.
Are there any states that didn't close at all?
There are. There's a number of states that didn't close at all.
Do you have any data? How do we, New Mexico, compare to those states?
So one of the interesting things is one of my staff has a sister with, I want to say 5 or 6 children in the public schools in Nebraska, and they did not shut down at all. And she said what's interesting is that the numbers across the board, all age ranges, deaths, everything that we look at here are almost identical.
Wow. And I guess that's important when we put it in context, because what another point you bring out in the position paper is that I guess your real concern is that this is going to have lingering, ongoing effects.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about that.
So when we look at what schools provide for kids, it provides not only education, but it provides socialization. It provides opportunities to hit benchmarks. And a lot of those benchmarks are things that you can't replicate outside of school easily. And that's social interaction. It's understanding what we need to do versus not do. How do I make friends? How do I have all of that kind of become a part of me to be a healthy adult? And when we isolate kids at this young age and keep them, again, just behind that camera all day, it really is going to affect their ability, one, to be able to make those decisions and choices as they get older, and two, if they even get there, right? We're seeing higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicidality in younger and younger children right now.
But now, can I argue that, so it's been 11 months, give or take. So whatever ground they lost, I mean, when they go back to school, can't they just pick up where they left off? Or it doesn't work that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, right? We wish it would. I wish we could just hit that fast forward button. But we have developmental milestones and we have to meet them. And if we don't meet them, you know what I'm saying? It still has to be met even if we're in slow motion. And I feel like that's maybe where we're at right now, is slow motion.
So, and then, I'm going to jump a little bit out of order here. So, as a parent, and my kids at home, they're looking at a screen all day, right? We're at our third snack time. What are some signs that I should be looking for as a parent?
So a couple of the things that you really want to be looking for are behavior changes, right? I'm hoping that at this point, you know kind of what your kid's new normal is in terms of activity levels, interest levels. Hopefully they're not watching as much TV because of the screen time that they've got during the day. But if those things start to change, if they become more irritable with their siblings or you as parents.
Now, I have friends who would blame that on just the stress of, now all of a sudden mom's a substitute teacher. And maybe she had no clue what the curriculum was at the school. And because I have friends that say, well, they're stressed because they're.
I think everybody's stressed. And I think what makes it even more difficult is when you're talking about children who are depressed, a lot of times it will come out in anger and not in sadness.
Okay.
And so you're not necessarily going to see your child balled up in the corner, kind of stereotypically what we think of.
Right.
You're going to see those outbursts.
Okay.
And so being able to kind of ask the hard questions and decide, are you just frustrated because this is 11 months and this is hard, or is there a little bit more?
And okay, let's say we think, okay, there's something going on. What's your recommendation, at that point?
At that point, if you think there's something going on, or if they've admitted to feeling depressed, sad, out of control, any of the words that they're choosing to use, you need to get them evaluated. And that doesn't necessarily mean, inpatient kind of setting where
Right.
you're, you know,
Because that has a certain connotation.
it feels really heavy.
Right.
But even just having a conversation with a professional who can ask questions and really parse out, is this kind of the beginning stage of depression where maybe seeing a therapist once or twice a month will help, or are we really far along and we need to have some interventions?
Okay, so you say interventions, and that was a perfect segue.
All right.
Thanks, Jen. Because medications, and then if we're going to talk about medication, then the vaccine.
Okay.
So is that a solution for these other problems from your perspective? We get vaccinated, we go back to school.
I think it makes a lot of people feel safer. The
Vaccine itself?
vaccine itself.
But is there still some public trepidation about the vaccine and fear?
I'm sure there is. I know there are some folks who want to remain as natural as possible just in all aspects of their life. And then you've got folks who are concerned about how quickly the vaccines were kind of pushed through the process. You know, when you look at the other side of it, you've got 3/4, 5/8, I'm not sure the number of teachers who are saying, I really don't feel comfortable going back into the classroom until we're all vaccinated.
Interesting. But from your perspective, and I'm just kind of basing it off of your position in the paper, you don't mention it specifically, but do you think that it would help? Is that a consequence of everybody being vaccinated, that we kind of fix some of these problems and get back on track?
I think that a lot of folks have been fed the seriousness of the disease that comes from it, whether it's a disease, a virus, or whatever,
Gotcha.
that will only be solved if we have some sort of cure,
Gotcha.
right? And
Right.
so the cure in that sense is a vaccine. And I think it will allay a lot of fears. I'm not sure in reality what it will do.
What it will do?
But I think
But you do think the kids need to be back in school.
100%.
Okay. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to. And then the other point you brought up that was interesting, I didn't know this, it was a KOB investigation. And I guess they looked at 22,000 students in New Mexico have missed more than 20% of class.
Yes.
Wow. Is that a technology issue? What is that? It's virtual truancy.
It is virtual truancy. It's a combination of issues. One, I think absolutely is technology. Two is if you've got, again, multiple kids living at home, do you have the broadband, width to...
Yeah, the bandwidth, right?
Thank you. To withstand all of them being on at the same time, or do you get Mondays and you get Tuesdays?
Right.
On top of that, you've got families who really didn't care in the first place if their kiddos are going to school. I hate to say it that
There is
way,
that though, right?
but it's there. And so we've made it easier on them to just stay home and do whatever else, is happening. So
While they're truant. So is this, do you know, is this a nationwide phenomenon, or is it just, are we in the...
New
higher
Mexico
levels?
is always in the top levels of the categories we don't want to be in. I think it's just one of the things we've gotten used
I
to
think
at this
everybody that
point.
lives here, we kind of know that.
We
right?
know it, yeah.
But
And
do you know if this is happening in other places?
I don't know that it's happening to the extent that it's happening here. One of the things that frustrates me, like I said, with the middle school program, is that I'll log on, and my teacher will also have logged on. That's through APS or whatever district, and they don't require their students to have the camera on. And so,
Is that a privacy?
no, it's a personal issue. I think that they're feeling, one, it's a bandwidth issue. If you've got your camera open and you're doing work,
Yeah.
it eats it up.
Right.
And so that's part of it. And then I think the other part is, where some of these kids live at, who else is kind of wandering behind them.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We've seen some of that in the news.
Yeah.
Right?
So now you're trying to interact and you don't know if somebody's on the other end of that or not, because all I see is a little circle with an initial in it. And then you'll say, okay, class is over.
So they may not even be sitting in the seat. They could be running around and you wouldn't know if they're there. And I see that's a problem. All right, so before we conclude, I definitely want to, let's say what a parent does, they want their child evaluated. could they come and see you?
They could see us if their parents are first responders or somebody in their family is a first responder.
Good.
If not, there are a bunch of other really great resources out there for kids. But yes, being that your audience is first responder,
Absolutely.
they absolutely can
The
come
majority,
see us.
but we found out it's interesting. For our YouTube channel, we saw the analytics earlier this week. 60% of our viewers are outside of New Mexico.
Really?
So,
that's great.
Yeah, we have pretty far reach. So that's why we wanted to extend it. But I guess wherever they live.
Wherever they live, there's always places to reach out and look for what you need. There should be services. You can go through the school. You can ask your school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. I think we were talking. We will probably have a part 2
Sounds good.
for this conversation, and perhaps have you and your husband here together, and we can kind of explore a little bit more. For those of you that are in need of evaluation or you, just want to talk to a clinician, we're going to put up on the screen the Public Safety Psychology Group, or PSPG. The office number will be there in the website. And with that, we will conclude and be safe.